So thanks everyone for coming out to this event. I'm excited because it's the first chance for the Show Me Institute to participate in an event with Liberty on Tour and the ACLU. John Payne is going to be moderating the discussion today. He's a research assistant at the Show Me Institute, and he has quite a bit of experience and interest in issues of police misconduct. So without further ado, let's get started.
All right, thank you very much, Audrey. So just give you a little background on the issue before I let our guests actually say something. Basically, I think the argument for why we should be allowed to film police officers and other government officials boils down to this, that in the course of their official duties, these people are acting as our servants, and we should be able to observe them, and if we don't like what we see in observing them, then we can hold them accountable. And these recordings can give us, very solid evidence, as opposed to, one person's word against another. It is a factual record that will stand the test of time and let people know exactly what happened. Now, recording the police is legal in pretty much every state of the union. There are two cases which it's unambiguously illegal, and one case where it's legal, but the police don't seem to believe that. The two states where recording the police is, as a matter of statute, illegal are Massachusetts, and I believe Adam and Pete will both be able to testify to the law in that state in fairly short order, and Illinois, so probably of more concern to anyone sitting in this room because it's right across the border from us. There have been several people that have been charged with wiretapping because they were recording police in Illinois. And as of yesterday, actually, the ACLU of Illinois launched a lawsuit against this law.
Predictably.
Yes, and we will see, hopefully that law will be overturned. Finally, there's Maryland, which although there is no actual law that says you cannot record the police have arrested several people and charged them for wiretapping for recording them. What's at issue is that Maryland is a two-party consent state. And so that means that both parties, if you're going to be recording a conversation, have to consent. But that doesn't apply if there's no expectation of privacy. So if you were to be having a conversation out on a city street where everyone can see it, there is no expectation of privacy. You should be able to record. What the police are maintaining in these cases is that when they pull someone over, that what they say to that person is private, but what that person says to them is public, which is kind of an absurdity. But that is basically what they're maintaining. And the most recent example of someone arrested for this is a guy named Anthony Graber, who was admittedly speeding his motorcycle down the interstate and was pulled over by an off-duty police officer, who then gave him a ticket and drew his weapon on him. And then, however, after Graber went home with video that he was recording on his helmet, posted it on YouTube, the police then came and raided his house and arrested him, and he's now facing far more serious charges for the recording than he was for speeding his motorcycle down the interstate. So those are the states where there are actual criminal penalties that can come upon you for recording. But even the places that it's perfectly legal, police still don't tend to like this. So, very recent example, last Friday in Brooklyn, a cop who had just broken up a party at probably picked the wrong sort of place to do this, but it was a video producer co-op that was having this party, and so pretty much everyone there is recording this undercover police officer, and the police officer threatened one of the people that was recording, said that, "I'm going to take you to jail, and in jail they're going to rape you." Said this a couple times. So while that's not a direct threat from the officer, it's probably rises to conduct unbecoming. And then more locally in Missouri, St. George, Missouri, a case that probably a lot of you that are from this area are familiar with, a guy named Brett Darrow was severely harassed in a parking lot in St. George, Missouri, which is just down south of the city, very small community. And because of that and some other scandals that swept through St. George, their police department was actually disbanded over this, and now it's all done by the St. Louis County Police Department. So recording does seem to have some kind of impact, because when these things are brought to light, it can bring a lot of change. So let me introduce our first panelists then, Adam Mueller and Pete Eyre. And they're both from Liberty on Tour, and that's a project going from 13 cities in 13 weeks to spread the ideas of voluntarism, which if you're unfamiliar with those ideas, Adam and Pete, I'm sure after this is over, will be very glad, or perhaps even while it's going on, be very glad to communicate those ideas to you. Adam is also a founder of Cop Block, an organization dedicated to watching the watchmen, as it were. And Pete occasionally is currently working for the Future of Freedom Foundation, which advocates for individual liberty, free markets, private property rights, and limited government. Both Adam and Pete were part of the Motorhome Diaries project in 2009, and both of them have been arrested multiple times for filming the police. Their journey is being funded entirely through advertisements and donations, so I'd like to remind everyone that MARV, the Mobile Authority Resistance Vehicle, their RV, broke down last night, and there is a suggested donation of $5 to $10 to help pay for the repairs and keep them moving down the road to Denver. But with that, I turn it over to them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'd like to say that I am the founder of Cop Block, but Pete contributes, and actually Paula, who's over here on the left of me, is also a contributor there, and it's a decentralized organization where we just like to encourage people to do, exactly what we're talking about here, film police in a, reasonable manner, I would use, because there is no right or wrong way. Obviously, like swearing and doing these things isn't exactly the ideal way, and it probably leads you into a cage more times than not. But we try just to advocate, what your rights are, not necessarily from a legal aspect, but if you're not harming anybody, you're keeping your distance, and you're no threat. These things are good, and we just encourage, others to show how that happens, and then we all can learn from those interactions. So I don't know if it is you have to add on that.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. The only piece I'd add to tie this all together about like voluntarism and kind of would shade how we approach this topic tonight at hand. But essentially, we believe that individuals should be free to act as long as they don't initiate force against somebody else. So we don't believe people with badges have extra rights. We don't believe as John mentioned, the video camera often sets is a record. It's a factual record, and most times today, in courtrooms, cops set the reality without that videotape. So, we just believe folks be free to act as long as they initiate force, and we believe every good or service could better be provided by the market, including the provision of law enforcement or peacekeeping. So, it should be an interesting conversation.
All right, but before we go on, I'd just like to, could you guys recount briefly, at least the Greenfield arrest, if not also the incident in Mississippi, which occurred when you were still with Motorhome Diaries?
Sure, I'll do Mississippi.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people here know the story, but
Sure.
for anyone who doesn't.
Sure. Well, the two times Pete and I have been arrested together for filming police officers. One time was in Mississippi, like John just said, was during our last project, Motorhome Diaries. Essentially, we were just traveling up the road, like I-99 or 59 or so.
Yeah, we were going from New Orleans to Nashville.
Yeah, so we were just traveling up through Mississippi. There was a deputy in the median, pretty much pulled us over for having paper license plates. The RV was recently purchased, so it had some cardboard tags from the DMV. The deputy stated that he had never seen those before in Mississippi, so he pulled us over. I'm not sure exactly, but I feel it was just a fishing expedition for the police. They just wanted to look in the RV, but as they asked us all to come out of the RV, I came out with a video camera. After separating us and talking to us individually, they came out and then told me I had to shut off the camera as the backup arrived. He said, get that effing camera out of my face. And I was told him, I feel I'm legally required to. When I engage police officers, I don't like to state laws or law says this, because you back yourself in a corner, and if you do that, then you look, it's easier for them to make you look like the bad guy. So I like to ask them questions. So am I legally required to do so, or can you show me that law? Asking questions. So I was about to ask him that, but he's like, then you're going to jail, and he snatches the camera out of my hand, and we were arrested. So after that, they did the things that I think they wanted to do from the get-go, but couldn't do with the camera running. They legally searched our RV. They illegally arrested myself. Our other colleague at the time was Jason Talley. He refused to show his identification. He wasn't a driver. He wasn't involved in the stop for any reasons. Supreme Court ruling says that you only have to ID yourself if you're suspected of a crime or any criminal activity. So he asked if we were under an investigation. They replied yes. He said, well, I don't choose to cooperate, and that includes providing your ID, which they then arrested him for resisting arrest. Pete, who was the driver and answered several of the questions, even more than he really needed to, was then arrested after an illegal search and seizure of the RV for possession of a beer in a dry county, a beer they found in the refrigerator, closed, and again on an illegal search. So it was a total hoorah, and from the minute they arrested me illegally, they just followed along the chain of breaking law after law to arrest us, and they knew that the camera had to go first, because if we had the camera, they wouldn't have been able to do those things, and they were convinced that we were maybe some drug smugglers or something of some sort, and all they wanted to do was get in the RV, because normally, even if they break these laws without a camera, and even though they like illegally search the RV, if there was a bunch of narcotics or illegally, whatever they deemed illegal, all these wrongdoings, would be overlooked. No one really minds. So that's pretty much the gist of Mississippi. And we were filming a near real-time documentary, even though I advocate for filming police and public officials at all times. But that day, they, we're on the side of a road, a public road. The police have no expectation of privacy. Mississippi isn't one of the states that's wrong in not allowing people to film their public servants. So, they just went down the line, arrested me and then everybody else. So that's what the gist of that one.
Yeah, and a couple things to add on to that real quick too. When we had our first court day last September for it, our lawyers who were all pro bono team, we got in contact with after this happened. They questioned the arresting officer and, why'd you arrest him? Was it for filming? And he said, no. And then he's like, wait, can you read this? And it was the report he had submitted when we were arrested, and it said like, Adam was arrested for filming,
Yeah, in his own words.
Yeah.
And an affidavit that he signed and got sworn into court, and then he had to backpedal because it's not illegal to film officials, but they still found me guilty, and we're still going through an appeals process.
Yeah. And they deleted the footage for the camera.
Yeah, that as well.
But real quickly, the Greenfield arrest. On July 1st of this year, we were up in New Hampshire. We call New Hampshire our home base for the Free State Project. But we were one of our buddies got arrested. We were going down to Greenfield, Mass. to bail him out. Walked into the jail, the Franklin County Jail, filming. And initially, the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, you can't film." And we pointed out, well, there's nothing on the walls that said we can't film. There's stuff that says you can't use a cell phone. There's nothing in the pamphlet that said we couldn't film. And then we said, "You guys are filming us." We went back and forth for a while. Eventually, a supervisor walked by. We brought him up to speed. He said, "Just let them film, take their money, get their friend out of here." So then we had heard conflicting reports on the bail amount. So we said, "Well, we'll be right back. We'll get the money out." So we were gone for about 10 or 15 minutes. When we came back with the money, they told us we couldn't film, and we were like, "What just happened?" And
well, we were when we went to go get the money. There was we parked my RV a couple of blocks away, and we went to a grocery store to get the money. And on our way into that grocery store, a city cop pulled up and said, "Are you guys going back up to the jail?" And I said, "Yeah." And then he gets out of his car and he walks around. And he's like, "Are you guys filming me? Are you audio recording me?" And Pete says, "Well, are we under arrest or are we being detained?" And he said, "No." And he's like, "Are we free to go?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so we just turned around and left and walked into the store and then returned to the jail.
So then when we went back to the jail, they said, "Oh, you can't film." We said, "Well, what's changed?" We just left. And then pretty soon the same officer, the city officer, Todd M. Dodge, showed up, and we had a conversation there. They purported that they were worried about the privacy of the other people in the lobby. We said, "Well, we're doing our best not to record them. They have no expectation of privacy when they come into your facility anyway. There's cameras everywhere." And but eventually we just said, "All right, we'll go outside on the sidewalk and talk." And then we were told we couldn't even film there. So we said, "Hey, first we could film here, then couldn't. Now we can film here, then can't." He's like, "We can go across the street and film." And we're like, "We just want to bail our friend out." So anyway, they said, "Well, if you don't stop filming, you're going to be arrested for trespassing." And they eventually arrested us. We were kept overnight again, and they charged us with felony wiretapping, and they searched the RV, which again was not even involved, and they so we have a number of charges against us, but it's all ridiculous, and you'll be glad to hear.
I was going to say, you should call the ACLU.
Well, the Mass ACLU,
these basket full of trumped up charges.
The Mass ACLU,
whatever state you're in,
they'd help us out if we get convicted and appeal it. So
yeah.
But I don't know. I feel confident.
Or once
I
our state
think you could beat that.
Yeah, we haven't done anything. But so essentially, those are the two filming related arrests.
But yeah, the two things, they arrested us for trespassing. It was clearly stated to us that we were being arrested for trespassing, and then after we were wearing coplock.org t-shirts, which we have some over there, but I think after they did a little research and there was several phone calls in there, I think they got a little upset because they turned the heat off in the jail on us, and they didn't give us blankets and stuff, and then like hours later told us we were being charged with felonies and that we couldn't leave until we seen a judge in the morning. So it's probably something that's used by discretion in Massachusetts, though I've heard of there's 4 other cases where people have been charged with wiretapping. 2 of them have been dropped because they were openly recording like we were, and then the other 2 were actual cases of wiretapping where you're illegally taping somebody, with a hidden microphone and or camera. So, and none of those, the other 2 that were convicted had nothing to do with police. So it's just a tool that police are using, either to trump up more charges on you, or, they like to trump the charges up and then cut you a deal so that you don't fight it as much. But I can't speak for Pete, but I'm pretty sure it's similar, have the intention of taking it all away. But the one thing
Could you clarify real quick, what kind of penalties are you looking at if convicted?
Yeah, well, we have trespassing, resisting arrest, and I think the resisting can get us a couple months, and the trespassing is just a fine. But the felony is obviously a felony, so there's things that come with that. You lose your right to vote if that's something that matters to you, and your right to own firearms and other things, plus jobs, the endless amount of jobs that you can have. But that also has a year-long prison term with it. Pete was actually also charged with not having a card to possess ammunition, though we've never seen, or there's no real proof that they've given us that there was any ammunition in the RV. So
yeah, essentially they threatened to break the window of the RV to get in. We didn't admit ownership, and then they when they found keys on my person and my driver's license, I got my driver's license to bail my buddy out. They ran the RV, and then they said they had a right to go in the RV because they said they couldn't see a VIN number on the dash. But it's not like a regular vehicle. There's no VIN number. There's no VIN plate on the dash. So then they went in the RV and searched it. And in that search, they said they found some ammo, which supposedly is illegal in Mass because I don't have a firearm identification card. So I'm charged with a misdemeanor VIN manipulation and then a felony firearm ammo. So that's like, I don't know, a few more years.
It's gonna be a hard charge for them to stick on him because the RV is our home. And we live in New Hampshire where you don't have to have, silly pieces of paper from the government to possess bullets. So, but yeah, essentially at the end of the day, to answer your question, a couple $1,000s in fines and probably 1 to 3 years in jail. Pete's on the higher end of that because of a couple extra charges.
All right. And I get a slightly, somewhat different perspective on this. It's Redditt Hudson. He is with the ACLU of Eastern Missouri right here in St. Louis. But he is also a former St. Louis police officer. So, he's seen this from both sides. So I think he's on the correct one here. And part of what he does at the ACLU is he leads workshops that educate people about their rights under the law, and including practical advice about how to interact with police. So, Redditt, why don't you tell us about what you think about people filming and specifically, a case like Adam's case?
I totally agree with the idea that we do have the right to videotape police interactions with citizens, and we should. As many of you are from St. Louis, you probably know the ACLU launched a program probably 4 years ago now, called Project Vigilant in North St. Louis in the Fairgrounds Park neighborhood, where we targeted that area because we had a significant number of police complaints over the years coming out of that area, particularly relative to police abuse of their authority on the street during questioning, people on the street. So what we decided to do was go into that community and put on Know Your Rights workshops, which are workshops about your constitutional rights, particularly as it relates to interactions with the police. But then we took the very sexy next step of giving out cameras over there. I don't know if you're from St. Louis, you probably remember there was something of a media storm around it. But more importantly, the reaction within the department, and I was a police officer for 5 years. Started off in North St. Louis in the 8th District. I was on the SCAT team for a minute. I was in intelligence, which is one of the more prestigious investigative units on the department. It does a lot of things in conjunction with other agencies, the Secret Service, the FBI, when the president comes in town. Intelligence is the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department's liaison to the other agencies. When we put that program together and put those cameras out in that community, and at that time it was not known how many we put out there, they called a meeting of 30 commanders. in the St. Louis City Police Department to come together and have a very serious discussion about what they were going to do next. 30 commanders don't meet on anything in St. Louis except if the president is coming to St. Louis. That's been my experience, and that's what the reaction was from them. The program itself, quite frankly, was successful in as much as I think it was something that inhibited some of the aggression that we had seen on the part of some officers, not all of them, but some officers in that part of the community. But it did not, well, let me tell you what happened. Our legal committee, shortly after we put the program in place and began to distribute the cameras, our legal committee came to us and said, look, we've analyzed the situation, we've looked at what you're trying to do, and you can give these people the cameras, but the ACLU cannot have an agency relationship with them. You can't have as I had told them up front, you know, at the front end of developing the project, that look, you have a right to do this. We encourage you to do this because, as these gentlemen said, it is a way for you to create an objective record of what happened on the street and thereby empower yourself to perhaps create some accountability on the part of, or an opportunity to hold an officer accountable for abusing his authority when you have an objective record of what happened versus the police report and the IAD investigation that follows your complaint, because we all know what those say. I think it was a federal judge that recently pointed out that, you know, in the last, I don't know how many years, but out of 400 very serious complaints of police abuse in St. Louis, only one of them had been sustained by IAD. But when we had to pull back from the agency relationship, because what we said was if anyone was to try to intimidate you for videotaping the police, threaten you for videotaping the police, or worse, you have us as your advocate, and if necessary, to help mitigate and work through the whole process. We had to go back and tell them that, well, you know what, maybe we don't. And that was it had a major impact on what I thought the program would produce for us. Because people are afraid. You know, you guys, you got some guts, man. I mean, it takes a certain individual to challenge authority like that, face to face, on the street, real time, and really assert your rights, because you have to assert your rights in order to have them. And the history of police interaction with people in North St. Louis, notwithstanding the fact that there are other issues there that may need to be addressed, I'm just talking about, and not just limiting it to North St. Louis, but throughout the country. The history of police interactions in minority communities and poor communities is horrific in many cases, and it's no different there. So they felt like we better not take this risk. We stopped distributing the cameras because what we had to do basically was just give them away and say, do with it what you will. If you get around to videotaping the police encounter with somebody from your neighborhood, please let us know. But you can also take your kid's 5th birthday or whatever you want to do. The camera is yours, and we'll see you later. Right now, there's so much going on in our country relative to authority and how it's exercised. I think we're at a critical point as citizens in terms of making sure that we secure our own rights. And he's right, the police don't have a different set of rights as citizens than we do. That's one of the things about police culture that got me away from it. You know, I was doing good on the department. Had I stayed there, I probably would have advanced. You know, but I was so profoundly disillusioned with our criminal justice system in general, and with the conduct of some of my colleagues, not all of them, because many of those people are good people trying to do a very difficult job. They are. But the number of officers who will abuse that authority willfully, whether they're black officers, white officers, the issue isn't always race and abuse. It's the abuse of the authority and where it takes place. That's what got me out of that mix, man. And this idea within the police culture that somehow we all grew up on the same block. We all grew up on the same block. We played sports together. We went to the same school. We know each other's parents and everything. You 3 guys go to college and pick a career. I walk physically down to St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, fill out my application, it's accepted. I go through the academy, and now somehow I am other than you, something different than you is us versus them, and we treat them, and it's bullshit, man. It really is. And we have to sometimes remind the police through exercising our authority that no, you are of us. You have chosen to serve us in this way. And that was the choice that you made. So everything that comes with your job is something that you've signed on to, but you are still very much of our society, and we're very much in the same societal system. And it's not a different track for you and a different track for me. So, you know, I really, like I said on the radio this morning, and then I'll shut up because I know we want to get to some questions and answers. I've heard every argument from the police to resist any tool that would provide accountability or a mechanism for us to hold them accountable. They've always resisted no matter what it is. And this idea that videotaping police is somehow interfering with what they have to do is foolishness. As long as you're taping what they are doing from a very safe distance and not endangering the officer or the citizen, you should be fine. The idea, and this is the one you hear all the time, and is widely accepted, although increasingly less accepted in the mainstream, this idea that when we do see something heinous on tape, someone being shot without provocation or hit without provocation or beaten without mercy, the Rodney King incident and others, and the officers come on, well, you didn't see what the guy did before that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The law doesn't vest us with authority to enforce vendettas or seek revenge on the street. We have laws to enforce, and then the courts have a role to play. And the idea, the argument that you didn't see what the guy did before we got to him is the same thing as a bank robber saying, well, you didn't know how broke I was before I robbed the bank. It's the same thing, man. It's ridiculous. So I'll shut up after I say that there are advantages to law enforcement with these video cameras and the prevalence of them. St. Louis's own police chief, Dan Eyre, who was a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, we don't see eye to eye on everything, be sure. We don't. But he understands the value of having an objective record of interactions between his officers and citizens in the city they serve. That's why he's pushing to get video cameras in some of his cars and ultimately all of his cars. And most good police departments want exactly that. When I was a police officer, I wish you would record what I'm doing so you can see what professionalism looks like. So you can see what the best of our training looks like when it's put into use on the streets. And the same thing with independent civilian review. I would want somebody riding in the back of the car that I was in so you can come back and tell the community how I am serving. Versus these officers who have this knee-jerk reaction, this us versus them, that you're out to indict me, and I'm protecting myself from exposure to that. So I think it's a terrific idea. I think it's a right that we should exercise as frequently as we can, and I think it's important that we do because we know what happens when we don't and something goes wrong.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I just have one question for you
Sure.
for clarification, then I'm going to ask both people, both groups a question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. But first of all, just for clarification, when you were talking about the handing out the cameras to people in North St. Louis,
Yeah.
why was it that the ACLU legally couldn't promise to be their representatives?
The gist of it that we got from our legal committee was liability issues. If something were to happen while someone that we dispatched was out videotaping the police, someone comes up dead, an officer comes up dead, and somehow we could be attached to those circumstances, it could create a potential liability for the affiliate that would be devastating. You know, you're talking about St. Louis we are one of the smaller affiliates in the ACLU, although we are widely recognized within that national organization as one of its more effective affiliates, I'm proud to say. We don't enjoy a huge budget that would be able to sustain a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that could potentially result from something like that. But there was some disagreement even within that legal committee of our own organization, and we may yet revisit the issue. But it came down to the money.
As many things often do. All right, for Pete and Adam real quick. So are there any circumstances in which you wouldn't film the police?
I mean, for me, no, not any. I mean, like I comment on Reddit, it's not courage, it's just the change of your mindset. I mean, filming police isn't wrong. The only reason why people don't film police is because they're afraid of going to jail. Sometimes an officer makes a mistake and does that, but I mean, they could just as easily make a mistake on who you are or anything else and end up taking you to jail. So it's just your mindset. Filming the police isn't wrong. I mean, you're paying for somebody to provide you a service, and if they're providing you a service in which I believe I don't like the service, I don't want to pay for the service. I wish the market would gauge what services I had to offer, because if the St. Louis North, South, East, or West Division of Police were beating me up, I could go and get the alternative to them that aren't beating people up, and I wouldn't have to pay for them. So never under any circumstances, if the cop isn't even doing anything wrong, I'm still filming them wrong per their rules. Cell phones are great. You can stop if you're walking to work or something like that. Snap a picture or at least video. I always like to ask people if I see them pull over, like, hey, do you want me to stick around and videotape? And some say yes, some say no. I respect the privacy of the individual. If I still think like the officer was yelling at them prior to, and then they still said no, like we were in New York City a couple weeks ago, one guy was like, I don't know really. He wouldn't give us a yes or no. The officer or something was like, tell him you don't want him to film. And then he's like, I don't want you to film. And I was like, okay, we're gonna hang around anyways. And because obviously there was something going on, and then the guy's like, well, I kind of do want you to film. So we went back and forth. But the officers tried to intimidate him. But in that case, I'd still say film, because otherwise I hear about it later that this guy gets jacked up by some cops I'm gonna wish I had, or if they start to rough him up, then you gotta pull your camera out and get it on, and you miss the start of it, and they have the argument of, well, you don't see what happened before. So, yeah, it's just the mindset. I mean, whether they're doing something wrong or about to or anything, I like to film them. The same thing I like to do is if the officers are doing something wrong, arresting somebody for like a victimless crime, I like to let them know about it. Like, would you do this to your own children? Would you do this to, somebody else? Like, what is the reason? And you start asking them some of those questions, and you'd be astonished at some of the responses you get. I mean, I've had officers tell me, like, I'm doing my job, and I'd say, okay, well, if your job was to arrest people with blankets, would you arrest people with blankets? And they'd tell me, yeah. I mean, if we don't want it to get to that point, we gotta do something now. And these things, I mean, this is the camera I first started filming police with, which is what I brought up. It's got a crack in it. It's probably like $90 on eBay right now, if that. And I mean, it's that easy. You turn it on and you're ready to go. But cell phones are great. I mean, they got the smartphones. Yeah, I recommend a program called Quick. You can live stream right to the internet, so I could be filming everybody, and it would go on to as soon as someone shuts this phone off, it's on quick.com, QIK, and like the case in Mississippi would have never happened if I had Quick, because they deleted that footage, and even though they would have shut off my camera, they would have actually put it online and in a safe spot for me, where you have a whole nother ball game for police to go into a corporation like Quick and get your password and then get to delete your footage. That's a whole new round.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah, sure.
You made me think of something. I'm kind of just waking up, long week, long day. There is another residual impact, I believe, that we may see as a result of the videotaping that we've seen kind of increase in the last 5-10 years. Police culture on paper, our policies are solid in terms of how we're supposed to treat people. You're trained in a particular way. You receive a limited amount of training in terms of diversity and how to interact with people who are from different cultures and things, but at least the effort is made. So formally, training-wise, you usually find a department in pretty good shape, but it's the culture. It's once I leave the academy and get to the street, that street officer, that veteran is telling me the first thing out of his mouth, forget everything you learned at the academy, we're getting ready to show you how to do this. And this is where you see the corruption and the abuse introduced into what's going on. Videotaping helps those officers who are more than you may imagine in number, who disagree with some of these officers are doing. It empowers them, I think, to challenge those officers who perpetuate that kind of a culture by saying, look, you're getting us caught up, or at least you're being exposed for what you're doing, and I don't have to stand here in isolation and be the lone wolf Serpico trying to call you out. And I think that one of the residual effects that we're going to see over time, not overnight, but over time, is that more and more law enforcement officers like Dan Isom and others are going to be calling for more and more widespread use of video cameras within their departments and more adherence to their stated policies in terms of how police interact with citizens.
Well, I kind of disagree with that. I think they're going to call for more cameras, but they're going to be controlled by them. And I also think that though the camera might essentially help some officers that are willing to stand up and speak, like copblock.org has had probably 3 or 4 officers that are on forces throughout the country contact us and say like, oh, I love what you guys are doing, I want to help, and I put this on my officer's radar. But ideally, I think the camera is ultimately going to let people realize that the monopoly on force or protection that the police have is the problem. Everybody in this room can go out and film police for the rest of their lives. If you don't end that, you're still going to have the same thing because there's still a lack of accountability. In Pensacola, Florida, an officer clearly chased down a 17-year-old kid for biking by a construction zone, clearly tried to tase him from his moving vehicle, clearly ran him over and almost cut him in half. He then planted a gun on him and had a trial, and this guy ended up, the internal investigation of cops investigating cops turned out that this officer didn't do anything wrong, that the rules in which police officers operate by were that he followed those and ended up getting an 80-hour paid vacation. I mean, and that was all on camera, and that was actually even on their camera.
And he went to court with that video evidence and lost that case?
No, it never went to court as a criminal aspect. I think the city, or excuse me, the victim's family is in the process of suing the court.
Yeah.
But then that officer isn't accountable. That's taxpayers, like, you know.
Well, he's not accountable at that point. But at some point, I mean, if we get evidence like that here in St. Louis, I think we're going to make a pretty strong case, and that officer will ultimately be held accountable for what he's doing.
This officer.
I think we're agreeing. I don't disagree with anything you've said, but I think that my point was keep exercising your rights to create these objective records, and hopefully across the country we're going to see more and more people, it looks like, doing the same thing, because it does position those who are in law enforcement who want to see the change on firmer ground, because it's a difficult culture to challenge. A lot of times here in St. Louis and across the country, the worst assholes are the most vocal and dominate the culture in the locker room and the public presentation of the police perspective. I mean, every time something kicked off in St. Louis there for about 5 years, they would go straight to the Police Officers Association, and Gary Reeder would make some statement that I knew didn't reflect the views of everybody on the department, but it was presented as the universal point of view of police officers, and it's just not true. So I think, you know, when we see officers get exposed the way they've been getting exposed, it helps those other ones to say, hey man, we can make our move now, because these guys cover the narrative of just being good guys doing difficult work who never make mistakes. That cover has been blown.
Has anyone here heard of a 1983 civil rights action?
I have.
Yeah, 1983 civil rights action is essentially an action that lets you sue a police officer as an individual, strips away qualified and official immunity from him, and you can sue him for deprivation of your constitutional rights. The other interesting thing about that law is that it lets you, is that once you sue someone under that, with that law, they have the government, the state government, the local government, the police officers association can't pay their bills. They have to pay their own legal bills. And a couple attorneys I know have begun using these lawsuits in federal court against, in rather serious cases of police misconduct, where the IA investigation came back and said that these people acted appropriately. I mean, I foresee that it will become a very meaningful tool for people like us, I guess.
We're going to attempt to sue the Mississippi police officers under 1983, but there's also, this is all legal mumbo jumbo for the lawyers to hash out, but they're like protected through some other law in Mississippi. But so we have to challenge that on top that law isn't constitutional as well, and it's a real mess. Not to mention, they have like a 90-day letter that you're going to sue them, and then 90 days after they get that letter, you can sue them, and it's just a tedious process.
Very briefly, if one of you could explain what does a police officer have to do to be able to be sued under a 1983 Civil Rights Act? Because I would imagine it would have to be something to do with, you know, a racial discrimination or, you know.
I think it's just a violation of your constitutional rights. I don't think it deals with race. Yeah, it's just
deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunity secured by the Constitution.
Right. So, like for me in the Mississippi case, it was my right as a member of the press to film in a public area and And for Pete, it was the illegal search of his home. and things like, and the length of detainment in which they detained him for, so both of those issues.
Yeah. Julie?
Yes, in your travels are through cop block, have you noticed an actual difference in areas where cops are generally, you're prohibited from filming cops versus areas where you actually are allowed to film cops?
There's definitely some police officers are much more used to it. We come from Keene, New Hampshire, and there's a lot of activists up there, and they don't even question it. You can be filming them.
You can put a camera in their face like this, and they're fine with it.
But at the same time, to answer the previous question, would there be a time you would never film a cop? I would say yes. I mean, because I have had some very candid, deep conversations with people that are cops, and I feel like if I was filming them, they may be more reserved. If I could talk to them as a person and maybe communicate some of these ideas or plant a seed or give them a resource, maybe that has a longer lasting effect. We've kept up email correspondence with some police officers.
Sure. But when I gave my answer, I meant while they're on duty in a patrol car on the streets, there's never a time where I wouldn't film a cop if I had enough time and whatever. But in private life, I'm just not mic'd up to film a cop at all times like that. So.
It is to film a cop. Sometimes it can be intimidating, especially your first time. These are authority figures, and they may tell you things that aren't legal, and they say are. You have to do this or whatever. And it's good to have a support community around you. I don't know if all y'all know each other here. Hopefully, there's some good liberty-oriented people that will support each other. But there is a great community up in New Hampshire. I know I keep hyping it up, but again, if I could real quickly to bring it back, I mean, filming folks that purport to work for you is good, but at the end of the day, if every police action were filmed, if there were civilian review boards, if there are all these mechanisms in place to try to check the abuse of authority, it's not going to be as good as if this good or service was provided by the market. Because you said you work with people that are heavy-handed or maybe corrupt or whatever, but ideally, if I was a company that provided law enforcement or security, I would have an incentive not to hire them because they're going to be a liability. And it's going to reduce the morality of my department and all these or my company. So these folks, these bad apples wouldn't even be there. And the fact that most folks wouldn't choose to pay to enforce victimless crime laws to say, hey, this guy has a joint in his pocket, I'm going to steal your money so I can put him in a cage. Most people are going to say, I don't really think that makes sense. So the fact is, the folks that are law enforcers or peacekeepers, they're not going to be doing all these things that erode respect for them in the first place.
I hear what you guys are saying about the marketplace, man, but my practical experience and the reality of privatizing law enforcement is usually the curve turns worse. I mean, think Blackwater. When you contract out these kinds of
that's because
services, they take the government out of it. We've even got private security companies right here in St. Louis that patrol right in this area, Central West End, but all of those guys are St. Louis police officers. And they're trying to really, move in the same direction as the police department sometimes when it comes to how they treat people on the street. Yeah. I'm sorry.
The problem with that, sorry, I thought he said, the problem with that is because these private security people that you have maybe patrolling this area, they're still competing with someone that gets their money no matter what. So how do I get more competition if, I can get this service for free, why am I going to pay for this private thing? If you got rid of the free service altogether, then you would have 10 companies to choose from. You're not going to choose the one that sucks, basically. So as long as you have that monopoly still, our views of what privatizing police would be can't really come to fruition.
Hold on, just one second. I saw this guy's hand up a while back. We'll get to Damien.
So I got a question for the ACLU guy. I'm sorry, I'm back with names. Redditt. Okay. What is your experience as a former police officer and ACLU advocate with the number of actual filed police brutality, misconduct, and the actual number? I mean, is it 1 to 10, 1 to 5? I know there's...
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking me, there is a number of complaint filed relative to police abuse, and then there may be a number that are not reported.
Right.
And what's the difference? Right. A significant number of police abuse or significant numbers of those kinds of cases are underreported for the very reasons we've been talking about. There is no accountability. And over time, in some communities that have experienced the worst of that, there's no expectation of accountability. And not only is there no expectation of accountability, there is an expectation of further abuse or retaliation or some penalty, something punitive, as a result of you trying to make a complaint about an officer's conduct. We've seen that quite a bit. And when I was listening to my co-panelists up here, the question I do want to ask both of them is, have you ever been abused physically by the police as a result of any of your work?
Well, I think abuse is
I mean,
I've had like a beating from being pulled over and like that. No, but I mean,
See,
I've been roughed up and slammed around. I've been
See.
thrown into the back of cars. I've had them deprive me of things.
that is the reluctance in the community that I was talking about when we said we may not be your advocate, we may not be there for you if something goes wrong. What came to their mind is circumstances that are a little more severe in terms of the consequences to them should they piss the police officer off or challenge his authority when they know that on the streets, time has shown them that really they don't have any rights that need to be recognized by this guy. And there's no way for them to assert them safely.
And
I would also argue that a lot of times, like in New Jersey recently, I was approached by an officer who was very aggressive and who afterwards clearly stated he was trying to intimidate me. And I think if I would have gave into that, he very might, or to that intimidation, he very well could have beat me. But I think he realized that not only did I have a camera, that I knew what I was talking about, and there might have been somebody else around. So that's probably, some of my knowledge has probably also kept me from being beat by police officers. So it's
I'd like to follow that up with, as a former police officer, why do the police unions stand behind corrupt and immoral police officers? I mean, obviously, they catch an officer beating someone down for, I mean, the case in Denver, a guy was talking on a cell phone and it was caught on video and the police beat him down. I mean, why are the police unions and the office standing behind him instead of shunning him and wanting to get rid of him?
It's a long and complicated answer. I probably would have to talk to you after this to give you the full response, but let me give you the short version. In many instances, that behavior is condoned. And sometimes race comes into play. A lot of times what we've seen here in St. Louis in particular, there's no comfortable way to talk about it. When I talk about race, since I'm getting ready to make these statements, I always like to preface my comments by saying this. A statement about white officers or white people or black people or whatever we want to talk about, there is no culpability in this room for the conditions that we have to talk about. We were born into this reality. These conditions pre-exist us. Our responsibility is to address them. But a lot of times, within that culture, it comes down to us, them, and who do we value, and whose humanity do we recognize? Ours, us, not his, not them. We do what we want to do. We are the authority. They are to be acted upon, and we will protect our interests and our narrative. We will protect our narrative at all costs. I was a good guy trying to do a dangerous job with a dangerous person. Look at what he looks like. Look where he lives. Look how he talks. Of course I did the right thing. How dare you question us? Come on, guys. Let's stand here with our U.S. flag stick pin on and our badge and look like the hero. And anybody who challenges us must be anti-everything that's right and good, and you must hate America on top of that.
Andy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I was a private security officer for some time, and I remember enforcing rules and laws and orders that I didn't want to enforce. So even though, getting back to the point where you made, if you had a camera on a police officer and asking questions on the job, why would they enforce the rule? And like, well, they enforce the rule because they're told to do that. And our legislators / voters enact the law. So if you don't like the laws, you just change them, like the petition drive I was working on John Payne and some people. And also for a private police officer, it's one that you have private security, but when I call the police and we have different private companies around, who will I call if I dial 911? That's one.
What, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess to answer your second question, there's a great book called The Enterprise of Law by Bruce Benson. I'd encourage anybody here that's interested in the subject to read it. It talks about the private, provision of law enforcement per se. But really, again, what this comes down to is incentives. And when this good or service is provided by a monopoly, they claim a monopoly on this. They steal money from people within an area and say, "You're our customers." They can't fire them. And then they say, "Oh, we're gonna enforce these laws whether you like it or not." And I would differentiate between law and legislation. Like law is, like a 5-year-old kid knows, you don't steal, you don't hit, you don't lie. And we all know that. But the legislatures and the people you're talking about, and like the politicians, they're creating arbitrary man-made legislation. They're saying, you don't have a right to put what substance you want in your body. You have to get these papers to start a business. You have to pay us this amount every year. And that's not legitimate to us, to me at least. And so the difference is these organizations, the government, it doesn't have to respond to market signals. So they don't say, "Oh, we sold X more percent of widgets this quarter as compared to last year." The way they can track their effectiveness is to say, "Oh, our department grew by 10%. We have more cops on the street," or "We have all these new toys to go out and use on people," or "We have all these new felonies that we can arrest people on." We're talking about pieces of paper. You said they look good on pieces of paper, like the policies that the St. Louis Department has, but how is it in reality? It's the same thing I would say to constitutionalists. Sure, on paper it looks pretty good, but a piece of paper can't constrain people. It can't constrain actions. We have to hold each other accountable through market mechanisms and not grant somebody authority. It's not a race thing. It's a individual versus authoritarian thing, and we have to quit granting other people authority over us.
I guess I agree with you in part, but could you answer the 911 part? If we have all these individuals.
Well, it's easy. There would be, let's say everybody in this room is a private protection contractor, and whoever's number you decided to hire is who you call. Why does it have to be 911? It could be a speed dial number. They could put a button in your house. Whatever the market would come up with.
A good answer too is also to say we don't know exactly how it will look. We have examples throughout history, we have examples in other societies. We have examples in different microcosms, but we just have to know that granting this authority to a centralized monopoly is a bad thing. Think about education. Think about everything else that gets centralized. It just creates it's a poor product that's very expensive. And we're talking about
the military too.
No, I don't believe that's another subject.
But we can talk later.
Bad experiences there.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, just a super brief commentary tagging on this discussion of a market-oriented security solution versus a state one. I've thought a lot about this, and basically, I think what it definitely boils down to is there are always going to be assholes that are going to love to abuse authority. And if they can't become cops because there's no police department, they're going to become private security individuals. And we're going to have to be just as vigilant.
But would you hire that company?
No, I understand there are market forces that affect it, but they're going to be in the mafia if they're not in a private security company. They're going to be out running protection.
What business is the mafia going to do if there's no one on paper to say something's illegal?
I understand the point, but the long 100,000 year scope of human history has proven that assholes will always exist and abuse people, and it is our duty as individuals, regardless of how we figure out, to be vigilant for those people. We're always going to have to videotape people and hold our fellow man accountable, be they private security companies, public cops, whatever. I think that's the thing to keep in mind. There's no panacea.
I don't know about that. But if we did have the private security and there would be assholes, I completely agree with that. And we were vigilant and we got video evidence of them being abused, their personal assets would be liable.
Sure.
We would take them to court. As long as we don't have that situation, we can make all the videotapes we want, and we take it and we show them and they investigate themselves and they give themselves a weekification.
I'm sorry.
So that's the only difference between absolutely we would still have to be vigilant and still record. Just like any business, we have to be vigilant and make sure they're not using it.
No, I'm not
The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. I believe that's Jefferson. Couple more questions. Yeah.
I have a two-part question. The first question is, what do you think about citizen arrests, other citizens doing things they shouldn't be doing? And the second question is, who would, in poor neighborhoods, who would pay for security? How would they have their security?
The first question was, what was the first question again?
Citizens,
Arrest,
not
okay.
just like police, but actually other citizens doing bad things.
Sure, well, I don't know if you can, I mean, I wouldn't arrest anybody, but I would definitely say I don't approve of this behavior, and if you're gonna do so, I would move, like walk away, get away, tell my other friends about them, tell people I'm associated with that, like, this person does these things, I don't like that, and, hopefully change their demeanor or their actions through those means. And then poor neighborhoods, well, if the building was owned by somebody that everyone is paying rent, that you know what I mean, they would have to cover that. There would be people that would provide protection at any market rate, and again, it goes to the answer of we don't know because we haven't ever seen it, but there's a bunch of things that could happen.
And to add on to that, I would, we're not just advocating for the service of policing to be provided by the market, we think everything, so the government, which today claims a right to 40% of your money, would be out of the way. There wouldn't be this parasitic organization leeching onto people who actually produce wealth. So the economy would be supercharged. People in poor neighborhoods, their standards of living would rise. There wouldn't be minimum wage laws preventing causing unemployment, things like this. So things would look different. But yeah, reputation would be very important for your first question. Ostracism.
Oh, okay.
Changing the subject slightly, on the issue of interaction with police officers, I mean, ultimately all police officers are humans, just like us. They're all likely to respond to overtures or provocation in similar ways to what we would respond to. I have personally been harassed by private security officers, taking pictures, things of that sort. Not by actual police officers, slightly different relationship there. I once saw a police officer right down here on McLeod at Euclid. I came out of the shop where I worked at the time, was closing up. The police officer was saying to a man, I've had complaints about you, I'd like for you to leave the neighborhood. The man was protesting that he had a right to be there. And the officer was saying, I heard this talking back and forth. Well, I'm just telling you I'd like for you to leave. There have been complaints about your behavior. When I came back out with my car from the parking garage, the man was face down on the pavement with a police officer's knee in his back, and the police officer was slapping cuffs on him. Now, if it had been me, and a police officer said, I've had complaints about you, I'd like for you to leave the neighborhood, I think I'd leave the neighborhood, personally. So, when you interact with police officers, seeing as how that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, how do you regulate yourself? I mean, when you say, I've got a right to be here, which you do have a right to be there, okay? Policeman hasn't had any complaints about you. He's not asking you to leave the neighborhood, but he's telling you to quit filming. How do you, do you make an effort to be as unconfrontational as possible in the insistence upon your rights?
But yeah, I always try to be
consciously do.
Yeah, I always try to be calm, cool, collected, and talk. And like I said, I always try to ask questions to them.
Okay.
So even we were in Philadelphia recently, and the officer, we were engaging them about illegally parking. They were illegally parked while standing on the street, monitoring not only the thing, but watching for illegally parked cars. So we're would you ticket it illegal for being illegally parked? And they're like, yeah. And then while you're asking, we're like, well, that car over there is illegally parked. And they're like, have a nice day. And then we sit there, and then he's like, you guys are interfering with what I'm trying to do here today. And we're like, we're standing on a public sidewalk. How is that interfering? It's another question. He just states, he pretty much plays his hand that I'm going to get you for interfering with an investigation or my duties. And then we ask him how standing on a public sidewalk would do that. And then he's thinking about it. He's like, have a nice day. This officer must have told us 19 times to have a nice day because he knew there was nothing wrong we were doing. We're at a safe distance. We're not all up in his business. We're not yelling. We're not F you, F this, go ticket yourself.
There's a lot of folks that we even may meet that say, oh yeah, we hate the cops too. And I'm like, hey, I don't hate the cops. It's the institution that I don't like because the incentives are all perverse. And that's the conversation we try to have with the officers. Is like, hey, I'm not saying you're a bad person or you may have good intentions, but it's this whole institution itself that's flawed. And we try to communicate that stuff. And
But now, do you? identify yourself? Do you give out cards?
Yeah,
Okay, all right.
we
So they know
write
who
notes
you are.
and put them on their windshield when
Right.
they're parked illegally and sign our names on them. I give them my email address if they want to contact me. I mean, I'm responsible for my actions, so.
Okay, real quick question from Ethan, and then I'm going to exercise moderator's privilege and ask one last question.
All right, this discussion on privatizing or market solutions is very interesting. Here's a market solution I don't think anyone has really talked about, is why doesn't Detroit or any of the big auto manufacturers sell embedded video and recording equipment with their vehicles? I mean, this is a simple technological mashup. It's a simple fix. You know, flip video camera is $80, records 80 an hour worth of high quality video, you know, on 2 AA batteries. Why can't you have this embedded in your vehicle as either an accessory or as part of the, you know, actual vehicle? I mean, modern automobiles are extremely complex and have a lot of computer systems. This is an easy fix. I don't understand why no one has done this.
Probably because the automotive industry is heavily regulated by the government.
Then why don't people sell these as accessories?
There are
I mean,
some kits.
The aftermarket
Yeah.
market for automobile accessories is huge.
Yeah, there are some
Okay.
kits available, and actually,
The-
they put something on top of like just here's like a $50 kit, here's a $200 kit,
Yeah.
whatever you want to do.
The second comment I'd like to make is, you know, this entire discussion on privatizing police work, it seems to me, I understand the thrust of it, but I think that there are some structural parameters about the way that nation states exist and the way that, you know, states, localities, and, you know, nations exist that make maybe privatized police impractical as a solution. You know, I see, you know, the idea of transplanting governance from one place to another. Like there was an economist, Paul Romer, who talks about charter cities. You know, he wants to essentially put Hong Kong everywhere and have you know, governments compete against foreign governments. You know, in the same territory, and that competition seems to have more of a I don't know, a desirable social outcome than you know, Blackwater. So I mean, it's a difficult issue, right? Because you want to create incentive compatible structures. Because the problem with competition in law enforcement is very fundamentally one of perverse incentives, as you noted.
Right. I guess to answer your question, I mean, personally, I mean, the idea of a nation state is just an arbitrary construct, like the belief that we have
Yeah,
the rights.
I mean, but you're not going
to.
to take that down the nation state.
Well, maybe not today, but we advocate a peaceful evolution. And, you know, like 100 years ago, people would try one form of government and then another form of government, just a revolution around a hub of authority. And we're saying, no, you own your life. You have a right to what you produce.
Sure. Well, what I'm suggesting is perhaps there was an incentive.
Try to wrap this up.
Yeah. Or all I would say too is that, fine, like you feel the need that there has to be a nation state, that you said you have some strong arguments without getting into them or whatever, with the nation state that you want coming after me to get what you want. You know, would you send men with a gun to my house to pay for your protection?
Yeah.
Because would you let the people that I want to live with not have our nation state?
I don't want to fantasize about what the next nation state looks like, but I do want to think about how to devolve the concentration of authority and create law enforcement structures that compete with each other as a structural matter. You know, as a matter of structure. You know,
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I'm going to ask one more question, but everyone is welcome and invited to join us at Sasha's on Shaw, which is just down on, what was the actual address exact?
4065.
Shaw and Third.
Shaw and Third.
Yeah, so that is not very far from here. It's about 3 miles. Several of us that work here live in that neighborhood, so we know exactly how long it takes.
And Marv, who is fixed, is near there if anybody wants to stop by and sign the guest book and stuff. So.
Yeah, but one last question to all the panelists, but primarily to Redditt. You know, a lot of what, and when you were talking, you said that, you know, there's this sort of us versus them mentality with the police and civilians. And now, I've never been a police officer, and I'm only 27 years old, but it seems to me that a lot of this is a fairly recent development. I mean, I think it's been around since the 60s, at least, because, I mean, certainly the guys that were busting heads at the Democratic National Convention had that mindset. But I don't think that mindset was that deeply ingrained by, say, 1930, 1940. And it seems that it's taken on a complete new evolution at this point with the sort of militarization of the police. Everything is a SWAT raid, and everything, the most minor offenses are, the reaction is, well, let's get a tank and load it up with men in armor and, rush in there like this is a war zone. So what do you think is feeding that ideology, that mindset, and what is the most immediate thing that you think we can do about it, aside from, some sort of huge structural change, or do you think it requires a huge structural change?
Well, wow, that's a question.
Yeah.
I think that the culture that we see in police departments, and I think it goes back further than that. I think it's been ingrained since the inception of police work. Police departments in the United States really formed post-slavery or during the latter stages of slavery as groups and entities designed to go out and get runaway slaves and really enforce the laws and the wills of the people who were in power. And I think that's been the dynamic all the time, but I think that spreads beyond just the police department to our society generally. Much of what you see in police departments across the country is really a microcosm of the dynamics that exist in our country relative to race and power. I think it's really being amplified now. If you look at what's going on around the nation with, the Tea Party and people who are protesting Barack's nationality and things like that, it really is kind of coming to a head with the immigration arguments. There's a struggle, I think, going on for the soul of the nation, and police departments have always been that blade that would ensure that people who were in power at the inception of the nation, white male dominance, was what it was and should be maintained at all costs. And then you started to get towards the latter part of the 20th century an influx of some minority officers and maybe some different perspectives on these departments. But that culture of authority and using that authority and exercising that authority at all costs, especially in particular communities, has always been prevalent. But now we have an opportunity. This is the most progressive generation in the history, or one of the most progressive generations in the history of this country. All of the kids that I know grow up with some understanding of other cultures, other people, respect for those other cultures and other people and religions, and now is an opportunity in history to really start to address some of the issues we've seen plague us for years. And I would like to see more people in law enforcement. That's why I made the point about videotapes and objective evidence empowering those progressive officers. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. There are many, more than you probably would think, to act on what they believe and to impact the culture around them. Wherever you are in the criminal justice process, I think if you've come from a community that has suffered under the oppression of the system, whether you're a judge, a police officer, an attorney, wherever you are, you should insist that everyone be equally valued in the process, period. It's non-negotiable. And my closing statement is, before I went to the ACLU, I started an organization called Project Peace. It's been dissolved, but it was an organization that I co-founded with a young man who was a former gang member and a former prisoner. If you can imagine that combination of co-founders, former cop, gang member, prisoner, co-founders of an organization. And we used to say, look, man, the standard is accountability across the board. We don't care if you have a gang rag and a gun or a badge and a gun. When you come into our communities, around our families and our children, respect the dignity of the people in that community and value the lives of the people in that community, period. Police departments have never really embraced that in the soul of them. They on paper it looks good, but in the soul of them, they've been out to preserve the power structure as it is. And that's what drives what you're talking about.
Any final words, guys?
I'm good. I hope everyone comes to the meetup and have a good time. So
Yeah, if anybody donates some $20 or more and needs a t-shirt, let us know.
yep.
All right. A round of applause
Yeah,
for
appreciate
all our
it.
panelists.